Before we get started, a few premises deserve attention. First, there are subtle and easily overlooked passages in Scripture which either require interpretation of symbols or in some cases simply a more careful examination. For whatever reason, some clues regarding historical context are entitled to be recognized, and often they are not. Meanwhile, we should not forget that the Bible, which has deep symbolic and allegorical meanings, has undergone many translations and editorial sessions, where its text has from time to time been decided by the majority votes of imperfect human beings. And translations do matter. In Genesis, the precise quote from God to Moses at the burning bush is, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I will become what I will become. But this did not comport with King James translator's view of God. Never mind that God is apparently doing the disagreeing. And later on, Moses leads the people across the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. But those translators might have thought that Yam Suf just was not deep enough to give the readers a thrill. At any rate, those who insist that neither Jim Jones nor Vernon David Koresh Howell could possibly misrepresent the Scriptures in any way have a take on reality that leaves no room for me, to say nothing of facts. Secondly, I do not condemn what I do not fully understand. I might be questioning the deeper truths of time, space, and gravity if I did. The same applies to astrology, what some have called an infant and therefore a false science. I suppose a baby is a false grown-up, but I have no doubt that my grandsons shall, and might already, be outthinking me. Gosh, how hard could that be? Astrology has a pedigree that many, maybe most, of its detractors know nothing about. And while some think it is charitable to view astrology as an infant type of astronomy, I am in awe of the discoveries made by Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, and Werner Heisenberg, upending what I once thought were the unbreakable laws of physics. As a matter of fact, I am so much in awe of what I once considered impossible that I abstain from arguing that astronomy is not infant astrology. And finally, in my humble opinion, it will take a long and precise view of history to evaluate properly the contributions of Pope Benedict XVI, not only to the biography of the Christian Church, but to the history of the world itself. Beyond the short term, in which he made possible a pontiff's leaving office under his own power, he facilitated the appearance of laboratory data that could reveal the assertion that the Turin Shroud is a hoax might itself be the real hoax. But Pope Benedict earned my personal admiration when he affirmed that an error in calculation led 6th century monk Dionysius Exiguus to place the birth of Jesus several years after it actually occurred. That is critical to the account we are about to consider. The Gospels do not treat December 25, or any other date for that matter, as particularly conclusive regarding the natal day of Jesus. And given that this date is historically linked to pre-Christian celebrations, the Yuletide season is understandably rejected by those who think pagan fiestas denigrate not only the month, but the entire nativity story. But contained in the book of Matthew are clues which strongly suggest that there is more to December's role in that story than one might at first glance suspect. I have already sung the praises of December's dynamism, and I have paid homage to some of the ways in which Western civilization itself has done the same. But one can quickly become lost simply in attempting to scope out all the holidays that have become associated on or about the day on which our orbit around the sun brings us closer to it. There are some who think that similarities in various international religious observances show that they cancel out each other's importance, when in fact they emphasize how meaningful the season truly is. Instead of being lost among supposedly conflicting festivals, let us concentrate on an event that requires only human effort to appreciate it. That, by the way, may explain why it remains so terribly underappreciated. It involves heavenly bodies, that is, objects visible in the night sky and included in the general category of stars, with a very old Greek name, planetes, wanderers or wandering stars, planets. The date is Christmas morning, 1603. The place is Prague in today's Czech Republic, and the undersung hero of the story is Johannes Kepler. He watched as two such wandering stars, Jupiter and Saturn, began a spectacular performance, launched by the presence of a third, Mercury. Having appeared in a triple union, a morning triangle in the east just before it faded in the rising sun, the wandering stars of Jupiter and Saturn bade Mercury farewell. The term junction may be too pedestrian. In fact, Jupiter and Saturn then began a celestial Apache dance, continually leapfrogging each other, westward, first across the pre-dawn and then the evening skies, which Kepler followed throughout the spring, summer, and autumn of 1604. Although seemingly capricious choreography was in play, in fact, the planets simply were following their orbital paths. It all appeared quite extraordinary because it was being observed from Earth, which was proceeding in its own orbit, and therefore giving Earth-bound viewers a constantly moving platform of observation. This is a very rough comparison, but it is a bit like being a passenger in a moving car as it approaches, passes, and then puts behind it a slower moving vehicle. At first, that vehicle may be moving faster than the passenger's car and is therefore seemingly moving away from it. But as the passenger's car gains speed, the other vehicle seems to stop and then reverse its direction, even though it continues moving in one direction at a constant speed. And this occurs while both are moving in the same direction. If we could introduce a third car in a different path without causing a collision, the optical illusion would be even more complex and more astonishing. And those were the conditions under which Kepler and countless other astronomers observed the 1604 night sky. In October of that year, Kepler's familiarity with the orbital path of Mars led him to calculate that it would join Saturn and Jupiter to form another three-star union, even though it would occur when sunlight would obscure it. This would be exciting for astronomers, but not so much for casual stargazers. If laymen were so inspired to look heavenwards, they would need an added incentive. probably that is just what they got. On October 17, after several nights which prevented skywatching in Prague, the developing triple conjunction was joined by a nova, the brilliant light of an erupting star. From that moment, the planetary arrangement rose to prominence as Kepler's star. This gave viewers an unforgettably dazzling December, one which, even without a nova, would be a roughly once in 8 centuries experience. But one might say that this was only the beginning of the event's true significance. Periodicity, repeating cycles, are an immutable fact of the universe. The many apparencies of the cosmos are by no means one-offs. What happened before is destined to happen again, and one-and-done phenomena, random in nature, are for the most part accepted as such because we cannot stick around long enough to see them repeated. Astronomers, beneficiaries of ancient knowledge based upon the unfailingly observant activities of those we call astrologers, were aware that unique events are anything but unique in the life of time itself. This means that seemingly extra observational information concerned with something more than the identification and traveling patterns of the planets was also passed along to these Renaissance scientists. And whether they shared their predecessors' confidence in the validity of any accompanying astrological beliefs, it is edifying to know how confident these predecessors were. It may be worth noting that, aside from the planets which are visible to the unaided eye, there are some 10 to the 21st power, that is, one with 21 zeros, or 1 septillion, stars in the visible universe, creating a virtually limitless number of displays in the night sky. The Magi of the Nativity story are justifiably described as the wise men in the 2nd chapter of Matthew. The evangelist no doubt appreciated the difficulty that Judean and Israelite religious leaders might have faced in accepting these sages of Persian and Chaldean background, that they could possibly be enlightened with regards to God's divine plan. Jewish history had necessarily made them quite wary of other cultures, and they rarely encountered those whose beliefs were based in monotheism. The wise men adhered to the teachings of Zoroaster, who, half a millennium earlier, had taught the precepts of one all-powerful God, whom he identified as Ahura Mazda, literally the Lord of Wisdom. Perhaps the confusion arose from their founder's promotion of astrology, which the least attentive among devout Westerners at the time equated with star worship. This perception is recalled in the premier nativity hymn of the Eastern Orthodox churches, which declares that through Jesus' birth, those who worship the stars were taught by a star to adore thee, the Sun, S-U-N, of righteousness, and to know thee the Orient from on high. It also shows that Matthew's assertion had won the day, that the Magi were on the right side. While I respect those who accept astrology, I do not pretend to be well acquainted with it. Indeed, I can scarcely imagine, much less approach, Johannes Kepler's expertise in this matter. Suffice it to say that he knew the significance of the planets in the minds of every magus, and that the union of planets in Kepler's star indicated that a great leader was about to be, or had been, born among the Jewish people. The Magi may not have expected a brutally jealous puppet monarch named Herod the Great to respond adversely to their inquiry about this leader, because what much later translations of the gospel call the King of the Jews might not have been viewed by the wise men as competition to secular authority. And that secular authority, of course, was Herod. In any case, Herod, who had no problem eliminating family members whom he considered threats, was obviously not fond of taking chances. To be sure, until his visitors appeared, no one in Herod's court was aware of any astronomical goings-on. But, as we may infer, when he was told the star had first appeared 2 years earlier, he decided that all males 2 years and younger had to be liquidated. This was classic Herodic overkill. Extravagant, but effective. Of course, a great deal of emphasis has been placed upon the plain truth that during this time several pre-Christian festivals were celebrated every December by the people of Rome. And that emphasis is certainly justified. The most imposing was Saturnalia, which, number one, celebrated whatever abundance the harvest had provided with almost desperate gratitude that any such abundance existed. And two, it helped dispose of any extra days that did not fit neatly into the calendars of the time. The celebration itself, complete with fermented fruits of the vine and the obvious loss of inhibitions it caused, tended to obscure its focus, and at some point no one could be completely sure about who was celebrating what. A special respect for the future, which Romans hoped to see by surviving the coming winter, led them to celebrate Juvenalia, by which they paid homage to their own children, who, after all, comprised the country's future. It was a far more sober assessment of reality than another behavior, honoring, so to speak, the temporary rise of misrule, which was truly well named. It created symbolic disorder by pretending that the rules of proper society were suspended, as if disorder were not already part of the activities. Yet, even here, the Roman idea of propriety required that impropriety be properly sanctioned. There was, however, a more serious, even reverent, part of the year-end bash, saluting the birth of Mithras, the unconquerable sun, an idea introduced by Persian mythology before the time of Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, as the Greeks called him, in which he began replacing their polytheistic panoply with devotion to one all-present, all-knowing, and almighty God. In fact, Mithras was not exclusively viewed as an idol. His name could mean contract or obligation, something supermaterial. Now, it is a stretch to say that he was viewed as having human and divine attributes, but in some respects he presented a precursor to the contemplated nature of Jesus. And, to be sure, some similarities are striking, including Mithras' purported birth on December 25 and the manner in which he was greeted and worshipped by shepherds. For some, this is just one coincidence too many, suggesting a blend of traditions which blur the lines between fact and fable concerning Christianity. And for those who, without questioning, link the date of Christ's arrival with shepherds guarding their flocks, Mithran custom, which introduces adoring shepherds, creates more than a bit of a bother. Evidence indicates that Herod's infanticidal meltdown began almost precisely 2 years after the planetary unions began. In the absence of additional information, we would have no clear idea of when this 24-month night sky spectacular got underway. Something so general, so vague, as knowing that shepherds were guarding their flocks could point to the spring or autumn of a given year, but certainly not much more. Information regarding Herod's demise in 4 BC, and more recently deemed before the Common Era, can reduce the range of possibilities to a given span of years, but it provides nothing more specific. There are, however, actors in historical events that are unimpeachable witnesses to the events themselves, and these include the ever-faithful periodicity of planetary orbits. Johannes Kepler invested considerable sweat equity and made a remarkably precise determination. The conjunction that would become known as the Star of Bethlehem first appeared December 3, 7 BC. And ever since then, Mr. Kepler has faced predictable criticism, if for no other reason than that it affirms an observation of astronomers in far more recent times. Rarely does one need to fear that, if she or he comes up with a good idea, it will be stolen by others. To be sure, if it is truly a good idea, she or he will face great obstacles trying to get others to take it seriously. Some 1250 years before Kepler entered the picture, December 25, 354 AD, had, if purely by default, become not only the prospective or speculated birth date for Jesus, but the natal date for a Christian proto-calendar. Given what many have viewed as the checkered reputation for the Messiah's arrival, December has been viewed as a doubtful month for the actual nativity. This could, however, be a case of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, no intended reference to the Christ child, to conclude that the 12th month, named the 10th month in an early calendar, has no relevance whatsoever. This is quite possibly an overreach. Based upon the reliable periodicity of planetary interactions, Kepler could make a strong case that the 2 years over which Herod fretted so violently might very well have included 3 Decembers, each containing cardinal turning point value. If we are tempted to view any suggested range of weeks for the Nativity as speculative, we forget that one such range has literally astronomical support, far more than many typical speculations. And besides, historians typically and necessarily deal with events which they have never witnessed. Perhaps the greatest challenge facing historian detectives is to determine when within the 2-year interval Jesus' birth actually occurred, at least to Herod's satisfaction. After all, judging from his reaction, he considered that the birth which so unsettled him could have taken place any time in that entire span. The idea that Jesus was actually a toddler when the Magi arrived is anything but far-fetched. Now, the phrase ecclesiastical accommodation is not meant to be offending, but simply acknowledges that the early Christian church needed the lives of the saints to consecrate traditions that had begun long before the Nativity. St. Anne's conception of Mary coincides with what our mechanical timepieces place as the day of the shortest afternoon of the year, December 8 or 9, depending on the location of the observance. When the growth of post-meridian daylight becomes clear to keen observers, December 13, St. Lucia is honored as well. And December 25 was once considered the date of the winter solstice, the beginning of winter itself. We can indeed become lost in examining every celebration that is or has ever been made in honor of the season of light. So let us narrow the review. The number of traditional Christian saints' days, which have become so prominent that they are listed in the Old Farmer's Almanac, are notably numerous. They begin with November 30, December Eve, and the Feast of St. Andrew. This is followed with St. Nicholas on December 6, St. Ambrose, December 7, Anne's Conception of Mary, December 9, St. Eulalia, December 10, St. Lucia, December 13, St. Thomas, December 21, and of course the start of winter. Following Christmas on December 25, there is St. John the Baptist, December 28, the Holy Innocents, victims of Herod's pernicious paranoia, December 29, and St. Sylvester, December 31. And let's not forget December 27, the feast of Stephen, that good King Wenceslas so honored. Now all these saints' days taper off with St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, January 4. Considering all this, there is something to be said for the salutation season's greetings. Rather than excluding Christmas, it includes a great deal more.